So this week, we're going to begin to look more and more closely at some of the more specific issues that we face. One of which will be, can employees force a company to be more ethical? I also wanted to look at this article because it makes a number of very interesting points that pertain to the general conversation we've been having. So, for example, even though this article is from Romania, there are a number of points that he makes that are generally taken for granted in conversations about business ethics. Some of them are typified by this last sentence. And the argument becomes, if religion is in some sense a subset of a particular ethical tradition, then can we say the same thing about business ethics? And what this essentially means is and if you think about the implication, it's that there is no universal ethical system. That in fact, the nature of ethics itself varies by the type of ethical system. So when you think back about everything we've talked about over the semester, who does this sound like? Anyone want to take a guess? Megan, you want to give it a try? Okay. I'm not sure if Megan heard me or not. Remember when we were talking about the 17th century, we said that the fundamental split in Western culture was between Edward Herbert and Rene Descartes. We've said that the consequence of what Herbert said ultimately became that there is no universal ethical system. And there is no universal because there is no a priori human nature. Does that make sense, people? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any questions so far? Okay. If there is no absolute, then how do we make ethical decisions? I want to argue tonight that part of the problem we're seeing in the modern world is that when ethics becomes specific to one area of human life. The result will always be conflict, and the technical term is moral ambiguity, which means we can't make moral decisions. So let's look more closely at the article from the Romanian authors. It's interesting that every combination of dialogue he makes comes down to the problem that we've seen. Eastern morality is different than European morality because Eastern culture and European culture are different. Notice the way he phrases the last part of this. Diversity provides value and develops implementation strategies in varied conditions. Is that really true? Before we talk about that, let's look at one more point. What are moral standards? Associated with feelings of shame and fear. Behind these standards stands a good reason. They are not based on authority, and they are not reduced to a level of self-interest, nor can they be accused of partiality. And the argument he's going to make is that shame and fear are defined by a particular culture. So again, we want to ask the question, so Kayla Ingram, what do you think?
What do I think about?
Does it always come down to fear and shame?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. Ashari, what do you think? Are you able to offer any insight tonight? Wow, it must have been a hell of a spring break, folks.
So you're asking the question, does ethics always come down to fear and shame?
Yeah.
So does fear and shame always guide what is moral?
Mm-hmm.
I think fear and shame are definitely critical components of it.
Mm-hmm.
That but I don't think that's the only thing. I think, like, if you have a genuine love for human life, you don't want to hurt other people. It's not that you would feel ashamed of hurting someone. You don't want to hurt them purely because you want to see other people prosper. I don't think that fear and shame is the only thing that can dictate your actions when it comes to ethics.
Okay, so if we think about the implications, and I think you're right, if it always comes down to fear and shame, then
Now, wait, as far as coming down from or looking at it in that aspect, now that I'm really thinking about it, I don't think it comes down to fear and shame. I think it comes down to more of right or wrong, more so than fear and shame.
All right, I would agree with you. And then we're back to the question of how do we determine right and wrong? And if you think about everything we've said so far this semester, the result of what Edward Herbert said takes us into moral relativity. Before this class, I have open discussion with ethics in the computer age. The problem with Descartes is that there is a difference between our understanding of technology or business and the real life situations. We face. Example. Two people in company X are dating. They both have company phones. We have a company policy that says that people who work in the company can't date. They go out to dinner. They take a photograph, a selfie of them as a couple. When they break up, one of them posts the photograph to Facebook with a comment about the end of the relationship. Since it's my company and I'm concerned about maintaining a work environment that's not hostile, I fire them both. From a moral and ethical perspective, can I do that? There is nothing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say yes, you could do that.
Okay. And I think most people would agree.
Mm-hmm.
But in the real world, because our legal system is still trapped in the 17th century, we end up with words like or phrases so when I fire them both, they turn around and they sue me for a hostile work environment, or they fire me for invasion of privacy. In all reality, that could very well happen. And the outcome would be open to debate. In the absence of clear moral and ethical statements, or principles, everything is open to debate. Does that make sense, or shall I go into it more deeply?
That makes sense.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments so far? Okay. One of the principles that is generally held in business ethics is the argument that the good of the individual is defined by the good of the company. The good of the individual is defined by the good of the company. If you look at this chart about ethical values, notice that fairness, dignity, seriousness, and charity rank well below respect and honesty. I can be honest in the execution of my job without being fair, without being transparent. Do you see that? I'll let you think about that. This article, and this is not unusual, begins with the idea that the absolute moral principle at the top of the list is loyalty to the company. Business ethics is employees' loyalty to the company, which raises the question of the limits of loyalty. Loyalty becomes essential in the business process, and the employee must be loyal to the company, except for extreme situations which are illegal or can be considered. And how do we make the decision as to what's considered unethical? So the argument being made here is, number one, business ethics is fundamentally different and unique from other forms of ethics. Number two, the highest good or greatest good is loyalty to the company. What is an extreme situation? We don't really know. So in my last corporate job, I listened to someone in the PR department try to convince a reporter that the maladaptation, the deformity of fish and frogs in ponds on farms that heavily used their fertilizer and insecticide was a random event. When in fact it wasn't. The PR person was doing what someone who is loyal to the company would do. But isn't lying about genetic deformities as the result of a product your company sells, is that not an extreme situation? So the point that I want to make is that when you define the good in terms of loyalty, you are implicitly arguing that the greatest good is what's good for the company. However many people might get hurt is irrelevant. Whether the environment is being poisoned is irrelevant. The greatest good is what's good for the company. Well, so what are your thoughts about that? Robleth, you want to give that a try, or Dahlia?
I wouldn't agree. I would think that that's wrong. When I think of moral standards, I think of something absolute. And so I don't see how doing for the company would benefit anybody else except the company itself, which in long term, I think being dishonest about products or anything else would only harm the company. So those are my thoughts on it.
Well, I would not disagree with you. But if we look back over the last 50 to 60 years, and these are just three: lying about the impact of smoking on health. Don't quote me on this, but I believe that by the end of the 1940s, early 50s, there was sufficient evidence to suggest that smoking cigarettes and tobacco in general increased the possibility of cancer. Ditto, asbestos. And in Detroit, for some period of time, the lead in the water was concealed from the public. So the concept of loyalty assumes either the company is moral and can be trusted, or shut up and do what you're told. Can you think of a situation outside of business where this has been true? In the Holocaust, I was just doing my job. I was just following orders. So if you go deeper, then the argument becomes that in some shape or form, that loyalty removes moral responsibility. It's no longer my problem. Questions, thoughts? How does this strike all of you as future business executives? Megan, what do you think?
So about the businesses,
Yeah, if I'm loyal, does that mean I don't have any moral responsibility? I just do what I'm told?
well, that's what businesses would like, but no, morally always comes down to the individual doing the action.
Okay. So what should the reaction have been? I'm not going to put the Jews in that gas chamber because it's immoral.
Well, those people would have been put up with a choice. You either do what you're told or you get killed yourself. And a lot of people are going to do what they're told because if they die, they might be the only person supporting their family. So their death might cause the inevitable deaths of their wives and children. So there's a lot at play.
Okay, let's take it out of the situation of the Holocaust and let's look at these two diagrams. We've been talking about this all semester. And this is the hardcore evidence. So, what this is ultimately saying is what we've already talked about, and that is if the sole moral responsibility of a company is to make a profit, what do I do when I know the consequences of implementing more technology is fewer jobs? And if you take it a step further to a conversation we had a few weeks ago, so if a company doesn't have moral responsibility to society as a whole, who is morally responsible? So if you put this in the context of what we're seeing in our own society, the Republicans are arguing for the first position, persuasively to the point where there really is no other option. They have locked our government down. So what do we do? Who is morally responsible? And if you work in a company and you're one of the people implementing that new technology that's going to wipe out another 100,000 jobs, are you morally responsible? Or let's look at Facebook. Everything that I've read suggests that Facebook knows that the impact of Instagram on teenage women is devastating, psychologically and emotionally, extremely damaging. So why hasn't Facebook done something about it? Well, that's why. So take it to another context. I'm not sure exactly what the warning on the package now says, but the gist of the warning is that if you smoke, you're going to get cancer. And the response is, because I warned you. And you did it anyway. I am not morally responsible. And that has been the line that the tobacco industry has consistently used. You don't have to smoke my product. You don't have to buy my product. You don't have to use my product. Your choice, your consequences. I have no moral responsibility in this. Or to put it more bluntly, I make an unhealthy product. The product I make is known to cause cancer. In all likelihood, you will get cancer. If you don't get cancer, there is a long list of other problems that ultimately will have an impact on your health, all of which are associated with my product. But you're making the decision to smoke it, so it's not my problem, it's yours. If you've watched any TV recently, the subtle argument being made I told you that that drug that you're using to get rid of your psoriasis will likely kill your liver. But you're the one who chose clear skin over a healthy liver. Not my problem. What do you think about that, Megan?
I do think that, obviously it's far worse if you don't mention the consequences. However, if you're creating a product to improve someone's health and yet it deteriorates another part of its health, then you've clearly failed at helping people.
Okay, I would agree with you. So what do you think about the typical company's response? I warned you. You did it anyway. Don't look at me.
I do think that people should, at least in some part, have responsibility. If, drugs are illegal and people are always going to do drugs anyway, and that's a person's choice, even though they know. So I think to some extent, people should be responsible for the products that they choose to consume. But I also think that more responsibility should be put on companies, because a lot of people are very ignorant and don't understand the consequences.
Yes, exactly. Informed consent, which unfortunately too often is used to determine moral liability, or legal liability, I should say, is based on, number one, my full disclosure to you and number two, your ability to understand. I can disclose all the information in the world, but if you don't understand it, it's a moot point. But the presumption is either that you will understand or that you'll find someone who will help you understand. So the companies are essentially saying, I'm not responsible for whether or not you understand. I'm responsible for telling you, and I did that. You're on your own. And don't hold me liable for something that's not my problem. This basically gives me the opportunity to sell you a fundamentally unhealthy product and walk away without any moral responsibility. I told you. It did it anyway. Which takes us to another question. And this takes us back to the comment I made earlier. No, I'm just doing my job. That's above my pay grade. That's not my responsibility. So the company's not responsible because its only job is to make a profit. It told you the product was going to hurt you. It's not the company's responsibility to help you understand it. In the end, you decided to do it. And that's part of the danger of what we're seeing. If you have psoriasis, wearing that spaghetti strap blouse, which you've never been able to do, is emotionally extremely appealing. And you may conclude that you want to take the risk. But part of what concerns me in all of this is that when this is the criteria by which a company makes its moral decisions, and I refuse to take into account the fact that emotion trumps logic, then how can I claim I'm not morally responsible? Which is exactly what's happening. If we go back to the tech sector, if you want to talk about nebulous terms, optimal user experience would be one. Think about what we said at McDonald's, or is happening at McDonald's. The goal is to have you use an app. In fact, McDonald's is not the only company doing this. Use an app. You place your order, or you walk into a kiosk, you place your order, you pay for your order, no human intervention whatsoever. And the argument is fewer people is a better user experience. And back in the day, when a lot of the automation due to PCs was happening, or that was the consequence of PCs, oh, we're just giving everybody more autonomy. We're providing our clients with a faster response. We're going to make everything more accurate because there are fewer people. We're going to be more responsive. What's the result? Well, the result is that jobs are disappearing. That by 2038, 80% of the American population, according to MIT, won't make enough money to survive. So, to repeat what we've already said, it's not a question of whether or not capitalism is morally workable. The problem is not capitalism. The problem is the interpretation of capitalism. And as we saw 2 weeks ago, when you start with the assumption that business exists in a state of nature, that business is subject to the laws of natural selection, survival of the fittest, then there is no incentive for business to be moral. And whether it's climate change, lead in the water of Detroit, cancer from smoking, liver failure from various psoriasis drugs, whatever it is, it's the consequence of prioritizing profit over people. So, as we move through the last few weeks of the course, we're going to continue to come back to the question of social and moral responsibility. And we're going to continue to ask ourselves, what does truly ethical and moral capitalism look like? And the last point that I want to make tonight is that the immorality of business is a reflection of the immorality of our culture. The argument that ethics exists in well-defined silos, business, social, personal, is wrong. All of the injustices and all of the immorality of society as a whole is reflected in business. So, if we're truly going to have a human and humane capitalism, we have to have a human and humane society as well. Cannot have one without the other. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to pause the recording and take attendance and send you on your way.